Welcome to the Encyclopedia of Catholic Theology podcast. I'm Gideon Barr, the Executive Director of the ECT, and I'm here today with Dr. John Brungardt, author of Natural Philosophy and Introduction. Dr. Brungardt, welcome to Cape Girardeau.
Thanks very much, Gideon. It's great to be here.
Well, you've turned in an excellent and very rich article, and we want to spend most of our time getting to know you as a scholar, as a Catholic philosopher. But it strikes me that as I'm just looking at your article in front of me, that it's called the Encyclopedia of Catholic Theology. But here we have this article on natural philosophy. Mm-hmm. What's up with that? Maybe speak a little bit to that.
Yeah. So how I understand that is under the rubric of faith-seeking understanding and the harmony of faith and reason, right? That the service that philosophy can provide Catholic theology is an articulation and a defense of truths that we're able to know naturally. Mm-hmm. And then Catholic theology can take those and use those and elevate them, as it were, to its proper plane in the contemplation of revealed truth. So another image, I don't think it comes up in the article, but St. Thomas will describe philosophy as the handmaiden of theology. So there's a kind of hierarchy there that the theology is the, as it were, the lady of, or not Boethius is lady philosophy, but lady theology is in charge of this kind of sapiential pursuit of wisdom, even based upon revealed truth. Right. And so philosophy and natural philosophy within that is at the service of that inquiry. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. I mean, what we want to do here today is sort of come to understand that when, Father Cuddy, in guiding the editorial leadership of the Encyclopedia of Catholic Theology, wanted an article on natural philosophy. How is it that he came to you? That's a little bit where we want to get to. But maybe just to start, to understand who you are, tell us a little bit about, where are you from? Where did you grow up? Sure. Did you grow up Catholic? And kind of how did you, what are your kind of first experiences of the faith?
Yeah. Well, briefly, I think Father Cuddy asked me because I would imagine 4 or 5 people turned him down. So I did grow up Catholic. I grew up in Wichita, Kansas. I'm the oldest of 10 children. My father's an MD. My mother was a nurse, and growing up, she homeschooled all of us. Okay. I received a really good education growing up, and that prepared me for later things.
Of course, you live and teach in Wichita now, so you're kind of a hometown guy.
Correct. Yeah, and I didn't expect that at first. So I teach at Newman University. The Diocese of Wichita sends their seminarians for undergraduate studies to Newman. My philosophy courses are filled with seminarians. But I never expected to go back to Wichita. Yeah, but it's turned out really well. Yeah.
Do you now go to the same parish you grew up in?
No. Well, when my wife and I moved back to Wichita, almost 7 years ago now, we started off at my old home parish, but one of the other, Blessed Sacrament, started to work out a bit better for us, for the family schedule.
Sure, of course. Yeah, it's just it's a somewhat unusual thing nowadays that somebody kind of ends up back in their hometown but growing up Catholic, and I thought it was possible you could still be in there, which might be a little bit odd to be, an adult man, a philosopher back in your kind of childhood parish. But
yeah. No, it hasn't led to anything. It's nothing awkward or it's how I've come to think of it, and what I've realized is just the sort of service that I can provide, especially to the seminarians. The Wichita Diocese right now, I want to say there's about in the mid 30s of undergraduate seminarians. So it's a real blessing to be able to
Yeah,
teach that many young men and
right.
help
I think
help form them. Yeah.
I think it's one of the kind of it's a real bright spot in terms of the number of seminarians and
Hmm.
how well the diocese is doing with vocations. Um, any moments in your earlier life, young adult, high school, that were particularly kind of poignant or kind of watershed moments for your faith
Hmm.
or influences?
Yeah. So the first one that comes to mind, I guess, more relevant to, I mean, what we're talking about here. Uh, I mentioned my father is a medical doctor,
Mm-hmm.
and so growing up, he would give um, a talk on the Shroud of Turin. Well, we'd call it his Shroud talk. The talk was actually the Passion of Christ from a physician's perspective.
Okay,
So he would just obviously use the shroud a lot to point
sure.
out things about Christ's crucifixion. Um, and so it didn't strike me as much going through it, but it was later, uh, I mean, through college and graduate school that I've found that was just the experience of going to his shroud talk so many times.
Mm,
Um, it, I mean, I've had other spiritual challenges, but I've never really had a doubt that faith and reason are compatible, or that the modern
right,
sciences and theology are incompatible. Like, there are questions that I don't know how to answer this right now,
sure.
but and I've found that I think it was really my dad's example, giving as a medical professional, giving
Right.
that talk, that look, it's this harmonious, truthful whole.
Mm-hmm.
It's you can understand it, you can walk through it. Yeah, so yeah, at least in that respect, in this, how is philosophy and the sciences, how are they helpful for theology? That was really
Right.
formative for me.
So you grew up in Wichita. You're homeschooled. You have an education there. Where do you go to college, and what
Hmm.
sent you there?
Yeah, so for undergrad, I attended Thomas Aquinas College back when they only had one campus, the
Mm,
West Coast campus. Um, and then for graduate work, I went to the Catholic University of America in
okay,
DC for philosophy. Um, I went to TAC because I was really attracted by the Great Books program.
hmm,
I had gone to their summer program the
okay,
year before I entered, and I met a whole lot of people there. And um, I'm still friends with many of the people I met
sure,
there. Um, but yeah, it was mostly for the type of Great Books program that they have there, which as far as I know, it's still unparalleled. Like, there are places that do similar things, but not quite
hmm,
what Thomas Aquinas College is able to do. Um, the reason I went to CUA, to Catholic University,
sure,
is partly because of some of the teachers I had at Thomas Aquinas College. Because in the curriculum at the college, yeah, we study a whole lot of philosophy, and we study um, what folks would call the history of the natural sciences.
hmm,
Um, so when you do that, there's kind of a tension that's built up. It's
okay,
like, how is
right,
Aristotle, and what it seems like it's very convincing. Some of the things he's saying in the physics,
hmm,
or the De Anima,
right,
um, how do they square with what Galileo or Newton or others are saying with respect to the modern natural sciences? Um, so I had the impetus to continue into philosophy at the graduate level was really to work on that problem.
hmm,
And so that's where I encountered the work of Charles De Koninck.
hmm,
At CUA, I studied under Richard Hassing, and Dr. Hassing, that's his area in general is the history of science and the philosophy of science.
hmm.
Yes, that's. I also attended CUA because they provided some financial support. But wait,
Certainly,
well, but to anyone listening to who wants to go into philosophy or theology, I tell them that you can't really don't do that by taking out loans.
sure,
So
certainly, yeah. Uh, Prudence.
yes.
So, a couple of interesting things there. Were any professors in particular at CUA, tutors, that that kind of encouraged you to pursue graduate studies?
Oh, so yeah,
Or excuse me,
Thomas,
at TIT.
Thomas Aquinas College. So, um, yeah, I think of John Francis Nieto, Andrew Seeley, Sean Collins, um, Richard Ferrier. So the those were all were tutors, professors who I had for these classes that are
Science, philosophy.
it's not really clear as you're going through how to resolve some of these disputes or debates, apparent contradictions. So they encouraged, but also supported, and I mean wrote letters for me and things like that. Yeah.
And so you go to CUA, and with this sort of emphasis in philosophy, the history of philosophy, the history of science, philosophy of science. Any formative influence? I mean, you said your dissertation director was Dr. Richard Hassing. Any other professors or individuals you encountered there who influenced your way of thinking?
I'd say the professor that most of all comes to my mind is Monsignor Robert Sokolowski. I mean, and I'll just mention him. Any of the teachers I had at CUA, I mean, they're very good teachers at the graduate level, and really helped me hone the craft, as it were, in various aspects. But Monsignor Sokolowski is just he's an excellent teacher, and so I really, apart from the content of his courses, it was helpful to see how he did things.
Right.
Because I mean, he had, at that point, had been teaching for decades, and his style of teaching was very refined and helpful as a kind of model to imitate. Because at Thomas Aquinas College, it's entirely discussion methods, so it's not. I hadn't been exposed as much to the more didactic,
like a lecture style.
and he's Monsignor Sokolowski is he's really adept at putting ancient and modern sources in dialogue. So it was Dr. Hassing also, but it was helpful to see that as a kind of model.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that very much is a kind of a feature, but both of your undergraduate education, but now of your professional work, is sort of trying to bring these two kind of things that are sometimes very disparate, trying to bring them into dialogue and to understand one another. I see here on your lapel you have a pin. Maybe explain that as a aspect of your Catholic intellectual life. And
so the pen, it's a Dominican third order pen. So I'm a fully professed third order Dominican. I joined when I was in DC, so there's a lay chapter there that I joined. So I see that before I met my wife, I briefly, just ever so briefly, discerned the first order Dominicans, but obviously that wasn't to be. But especially at CUA, I realized that how much I'm drawn to the Dominican charism, just because of their mission of contemplation, but also teaching. I found that's. I mean, I enjoy writing. I enjoy researching too, but I enjoy teaching more, and I find that more rewarding. And then I find that teaching well also informs how I write and research.
Right.
But that's it seems like I learned that, as it were, from the Dominicans, since that, becoming a third order, that felt like a natural fit.
Okay. And that's something you continue to this day. Are there other third order Dominicans in Wichita? Or
not in Wichita, so I have to kind of continue in exile from my province, as it were. But yeah, I'm hopeful that at some point I might be able to start a local chapter,
Okay.
some kind of branch. As long as time permits. So.
And so during your time at CUA, you kind of take this interest in philosophy of nature, philosophy of science to a higher level. What exactly was the topic or issue of your dissertation?
So the main idea behind the dissertation was to uh, comment on, to kind of bring to light the work of Charles De Koninck in the
Okay.
philosophy of nature. I
Maybe tell
remember,
people who
yeah.
Charles De Koninck is.
So Charles De Koninck, he's a 20th century Thomistic philosopher and theologian, born in Belgium, immigrated to Canada, and he taught for decades at the University of Laval in Quebec City. And his work is wide ranging. One of my other hats is the editor of the Charles De Koninck project, so the project to translate and come up with a more final edition of his works in English. So De Konink's works they range from the philosophy of nature to political philosophy, and then he has many writings on Our Lady. So his main area in theology was Mariology. And he taught a whole lot of folks at Laval, especially during because of the Second World War. Is more difficult for folks to get over to Europe, and that influence kind of carried into the
Okay.
50s and 60s. So he did, for example, he taught many of the founders of Thomas Aquinas College, like Ron MacArthur or Marcus Berquist. One of his other more well-known students, perhaps, is Ralph McInerney at Notre Dame. So De Koninck had a real influence on philosophy and especially Thomism in North America.
Yeah.
Anyway, so at the time, no one had really written on De Konink's approach to the philosophy of nature. And Ralph McInerney said so in an interview that I came across when I was getting ready for grad school. And so Ralph McInerney puts this in the interview and said, well, De Konink's philosophy of science or philosophy of nature hasn't been assessed by contemporary folks. And I was like, excellent.
Perfect.
And I when I proposed the topic to COA, I quoted that line from the interview and said, well, and it's still true.
Good authority. Yeah.
Yeah. So the dissertation was working through, okay, how does De Koninck approach the, broadly speaking, Aristotelian Thomistic philosophy of nature?
Maybe let's just dive into that just a little bit. It strikes me as interesting. You mentioned the Second World War. This is also a very this is a fruitful time in science, right? Modern physics, especially, even biology a little bit later.
Yeah.
What does De Koninck have to say about modern science or the philosophy of science? I'm sure many things, but
sure, yeah. So So I think a good way to start that is De Koninck is really attentive to where we start out when we know natural things. That when he recognizes that the various contemporary natural sciences, they've achieved a kind of state of advancement or technical status, and that can undermine our confidence in what we know more naturally or what's more knowable at first. And so his project, as it were, was really to show that those two things aren't incompatible, that how we know the natural world more at the beginning of our inquiry, as it were, it's not incompatible with where the sciences can take us in more specific ways. So an example of this is he has a little book called The Hollow Universe, and a lecture in that book is titled The Lifeless World of Biology. And the reason for the title is uh, he points out how many uh, uh, at the time, but I think it's still pretty true today, that a biology textbook will start you with the cell.
Mm.
And there will
And
be
that's opposed to like the living thing.
as opposed to the living whole,
Right.
and as opposed to the fact that we experience a difference between the living and the non-living, because we experience our own
Life and
our own
death
being alive, and
yeah.
contrast that with something that's not alive. But that doesn't enter into I mean, as a datum, as it were, as a point of scientific inquiry, that the experience of
at
being
the
alive
beginning of that.
yeah, it's not included at the beginning of
So
it.
it starts at a kind of state of abstraction from ordinary
And
kind of sense experience.
if you're not careful, it's the sort of abstraction that's a kind of reduction, that you're starting with parts in order to explain the whole.
Right.
But if you do that, there's never at what point does the experience of being alive as an intellectual marker and something you could actually have insight into to distinguish this non-living from this living thing, it's never quite recovered. At best, I've seen some biology textbooks do this. At best, they'll call that kind of experience, or that more holistic picture, they'll call it a kind of emergence. But that, even then, it doesn't really enter into the nuts and bolts of
Biology
what biology is. Yeah, what they're trying to get across in the textbook. It becomes more philosophical at that point. So De Koninck really wanted to unify those, as it were, the two sides of the discussion. Here and there, at least at one point, he mentions there's a lecture by C.P. Snow in the early 50s, but Snow calls it the two cultures, right? The more humanities and philosophy, and the other culture is the hard sciences, and they have different vocabularies and different methods, and so you're trained up in one or the other, and now you can't communicate. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Fascinating. So having acquired your PhD, tell us a little bit about your career as a philosopher. How did it start? How did you end up where you are now?
Yeah. So finishing the PhD, it took a little bit. I taught here and there. I actually taught at a prep school in Arizona for a year while I was finishing. I taught algebra and Latin. But the first major post as or that I had was I received a postdoctoral fellowship at the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile in Santiago. So I went there, and it was essentially a research project in the philosophy of cosmology.
Okay.
And so there I laid the beginnings of what now is more or less a finished book. It's still a month or so away from being a complete manuscript, but it's so that was a couple of years. During that time I got married to my wife Marina, and we lived in Chile for 1 year, and so I wasn't teaching at the time. I had a few lectures, or a shorter course, but it was mostly just research to develop this philosophy of cosmology project, and then after that, that's when I found out Newman University was hiring, because they, so I mentioned that the Wichita Diocese sends their seminarians for undergrad to Newman. And so they had grown enough that they needed someone who could teach Thomistic philosophy, and so to finish essentially years 3 and 4, as opposed to introductory or the history of philosophy courses.
Right.
So I found out they were hiring that. It actually cut the postdoc short by a year, but it turned out better. I waived year 3 for the sake of a more permanent job.
All right, well, good.
Yeah.
Good. Any highlights of living and studying in Chile? That's a somewhat unique experience.
Yeah.
For a lot of American scholars.
the best part of living in Chile is I made a lot of friends in philosophy and theology that were good Thomists, and yeah, I found, and I've kept in touch, and they've come to conferences here in the States. I haven't yet made it back down to the south of the world, but I think there's still so one of the biggest things I learned. I think there's a tradition of Latin American, especially Hispanics from Spain influenced Thomistic philosophy and theology that's just in the sequence of teachers and the school of thought that really doesn't talk much with North American Thomism, and it's not exactly the most it's not exactly the biggest of language barriers.
Sure.
It's so it's been good to have a foot in both worlds, as it were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it strikes me, I don't know, you're a philosopher of nature, a natural philosopher, but do you also have a love of the natural world? Do you like to kind of get out there and observe? And was there any of that in Chile? A kind of different environment than we're not in Kansas anymore at that point.
Well, at least in Chile, not so much. We lived in downtown Santiago, and Santiago is a city of 8 million people, so
Wow.
it's quite a stretch. But we did, yeah,
That's an environment of sorts.
yeah. And they like Los Angeles, they have a smog problem, so yeah, so not so much in Chile. I mean, my wife and I we visited the coast once. We wanted to go to more to the south. Yeah, yeah. So at least in Chile, the closest we got was we had a apartment on the 17th floor, and we looked directly over the Andes. So it was
Okay.
not really had a view like that since, especially in Kansas.
No Andes
No, yeah.
in Kansas, yeah. Is that a habit you have now, though, of getting out into nature, as it were? And
I should have more of one. The uh, yeah, here and there I like to do it with my kids. When it's harder now because they're a lot younger.
Mhm.
But I do like to. I have a small telescope, so it's more of the observation
Some
of
amateur
nature.
astronomy.
Yeah,
Okay, good.
that I like to do here and there.
The heavens.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel more recently what I've been doing is just taking science courses at Newman,
Mm.
just to familiarize myself more, have the focused time to, even though they're undergrad courses. I mean, I still benefit from
Yeah.
working through the material, especially the labs. Like that's something that, so you are looking at nature in a box, but you're seeing parts of nature that you usually or probably never would notice otherwise. Yeah.
So you said that in your teaching at Newman that the Diocese of Wichita sends its seminarians to study there, and that you were hired for your capacity to kind of complete their philosophical studies before they move on to theological studies. So just tell us a little bit about that. What are the kind of the joys of teaching seminarians or the struggles and especially teaching them natural philosophy?
Yeah. Yeah. So when I got there, the dean at the time, they had the course sequence more or less set, but he told me, it's like, look, if there's something you want to change, I mean, you can. So I was given more or less a free hand to the governing document, right, for Catholic seminarians, especially in the United States, is the Program for Priestly Formation,
Right.
at least the most proximate one. So it's like, okay, so there are some adjustments that I made. The Philosophy of Nature course we only actually put in this past year, finally, but it's really been fruitful for me to be able to, as it were, teach the whole gamut. Like there aren't many currently I'm the only full-time philosopher that Newman has. When I started, there were two more, but I've been able to teach the whole sequence, logic through history courses up to the senior capstone is natural theology.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a lot of fun, frankly, to go through the whole
Yeah.
sequence. And the students that we get at the seminarians, at a minimum, they all know that the church is asking them to study philosophy, even if they don't like it at the beginning.
Right.
And at best, they're very gung ho about it. They see more immediately the need for it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's part of the joy of the task of teaching, is to wherever a student begins, to show them, well, here's how a philosophical habit of mind assists you.
Mm-hmm.
It deepens your grasp of things,
Right.
just first in and of itself, and also for the sake of studying theology. So yeah, the seminarians are always eager. They prepare well. They talk in class.
They're good students.
Yeah, they're good students. Yeah.
Especially the ones from the Diocese of Wichita. They're especially good. Good. Your description of your work there reminds me that when I was at Mundelein, there's a legendary professor, Father Gus Balauskas, who taught in the philosophy program. And
when I visited, I believe I briefly met.
Yeah, Father Gus.
Yeah, just very briefly.
And but people say that priests now, and former seminarians who went to Mundelein, say that they majored in Gus. And so I get the feeling now that they're majoring in Brungardt.
Yeah, which has its strengths and weaknesses. I try. Yeah, so I in any given course, I'll usually assign one or two secondary texts they'll have someone else explaining it to them,
right?
Kind of a different voice. But yeah, that is the disadvantage of being at a smaller school, smaller faculty.
Sure, yeah.
There's only so much. We have some good adjuncts, though.
Of course, yeah.
We can draw on, so it's not just me.
Good. And the product of your labor, of course, for the ECT is this article, which is on the website now, Natural Philosophy and Introduction. But also, we're pleased to announce, if this is the first time people are hearing it, that an expanded version of your article is going to be what will be the third installment in the Catholic Handbooks series, and that we hope, even though the topic may not be the most, for the ordinary kind of lay Catholic in the pews, the topic might not be the thing they're most attracted to, but that we hope has great kind of adoption in the context of what you teach, namely the kind of seminary formation context, where it's a required course, it's a required kind of subject matter, and is very much at the service of, as you said, the cultivation of a certain habit of mind that can then even be further utilized in the study of theology. So maybe just say a little bit about that, about how, and of course the book I think goes into this in some detail. But how exactly does natural philosophy, where does the rubber meet the road between natural philosophy and Catholic theology?
Yeah, I think a really good example of that is how we understand the human person, right? Because theology needs an adequate understanding of the human person. Otherwise, it's difficult to articulate like doctrines like the resurrection of the body. You'll run into difficulties in Christology, right, because you have to understand human nature. And so there, if we expand on that, there's more or less three main views right? So you could have dualism, that the mind and the body are separate substances somehow related, and then the theory of dualism is you have to relate them. Or you could have a kind of, the opposite end is a kind of materialism, that what the human person is, it's fundamentally material, so there's not an immaterial or a spiritual aspect or part
Right.
to the human person. Whereas the natural philosophy helps you to see, well, there's actually a middle ground. It's the human person is not composed of two substances, nor is the human person composed of one material substance, but soul and body are related as form and matter, or the two key Aristotelian causes. So there's a real unity in the human person, even though there's a duality in constitution or composition.
Right.
But in order to understand that, you have to have discovered form and matter as something that's actually true about the natural order. So it's easy, or the danger is an approach, say from the modern sciences, that if typically they're presented in a materialistic way, and so that would indirectly or directly undermine that more holistic understanding of the human person. So that's imported in how we teach the sciences typically.
Right.
And so that natural philosophy can really help break you out of that. It shows that's not just the only philosophical gloss, as it were, on what the sciences are doing.
Right.
And that's just to take one example.
Yeah, but an important one.
Yeah.
Right, because you can kind of absorb. You can absorb a kind of implicit anthropology from our kind of more popular culture, which is maybe it's a weak version of, but it still probably presupposes the kind of materialist and a kind of reductionist view of the human person.
Yeah,
if you jump straight to theology, you get something very rich, but you're not really sure how that comes together.
Yeah, because I tend to think you set up in a student's mind any number of dualisms or trialism, triplets, or you have different boxes that, well, this is what the scientists say. I mean, it's a bit overly simplified, but there's to use Stephen Jay Gould's phrase, well, these are non-overlapping magisteria. Right. So over here, I follow what the church teaches, and over here, I accept what the sciences are currently saying. As research progresses, and well, hopefully they'll never try to say something on the same topic, but they very frequently say things on the same topic, on the same subject. Yeah.
And then you have to adjudicate the truth of those things.
Yeah.
And it's natural philosophy, which will do that.
Yeah. I think we should add, natural philosophy is one of the habits of mind. But yeah, it's without that, it would be difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
Without the tools that provides and the perspective. Well, excellent. I think as I said, this is a very rich article, and one we're grateful for your labor to bring forth, and the one that we're honored to be able to publish, and equally excited for the book version of it, which folks can look for soon in this summer of 2025. But maybe I'll let you have the final word. Any thoughts or encouragements to people encountering your article or interested in this topic and want to go further?
Yeah. Yes, when I was writing the article / book, the main audience I had in mind is seminarians, but really anyone that was just more of a proxy, as it were, for anyone interested as a student, or folks who teach students who are similarly situated. So what I'd encourage people to keep in mind about the article is that I'm glad we added the kind of the subtitle and introduction, because it really is just an introduction.
Hmm.
I try to map out from, well, here's the basics from Aristotle, here's the basics from St. Thomas,
Hmm.
usually in his commentary on Aristotle,
Right.
or little works like On the Principles of Nature. So it really is an introduction, and uh, I think it presents a set of principles that you should go further and deepen them. So I'd encourage people to take a look at some of the other sources that I put in the bibliography,
Hmm.
especially uh, uh, folks like Jacques Maritain or Charles De Koninck.
Hmm.
Father William Wallace
Hmm.
has books, articles that are helpful. Um, Other works, like folks that are probably more known to audience members, like so folks like Ed Fazer,
Hmm.
or if you're more advanced, like Robert Koons.
Hmm.
So there's a whole lot of 20th century or even contemporary work where we're uh, recovering these perennial principles
Hmm.
and showing that it's really only an apparent contradiction in various places with what the sciences are saying, and that
Hmm.
natural philosophy really does provide um, a way to more holistically understand uh, the cosmos. That's more of a it's more of a piece with what theology is providing. So,
Excellent. Well, very good. Well, Dr. John Brungardt, thank you so much
oh,
for your
you're
time.
welcome.
Thank you for this
Yeah.
article, and we'll see everybody next time.